I woke up that morning thinking it would be just another peaceful day at my lakeside lodge. The sun was rising over the water, painting the lake in gold and orange hues, and the faint smell of pine hung in the air. I could hear the soft lapping of water against the dock, and for a moment I thought maybe, just maybe, the world could stay calm for an entire morning. I poured my coffee, the rich aroma filling the small kitchen, and settled into my favorite chair overlooking the lake. Everything felt perfect, like nothing could possibly go wrong. Then I saw it, a black SUV barreling down the driveway, tires crunching over the gravel, moving faster than any casual visitor should. My stomach twisted. I knew the vehicle. It wasn't a friend, it wasn't a delivery. It was the HOA president. She stepped out with that same expression she always wore when she was about to deliver bad news, cold, precise, and convinced she had the right to rule the world. She carried a clipboard stuffed with papers that rustled ominously with every step. She scanned my property like a general inspecting a battlefield, her eyes narrowing at the sight of my deck, my dock, my carefully tended garden. I tried to smile and wave, hoping maybe a friendly gesture would soften her approach. She didn't even glance at me. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes never leaving mine, and I could feel the weight of the confrontation before it even started. I knew this wasn't a casual visit. This was a tactical inspection disguised as neighborly concern. Somehow I had become the enemy, and my peaceful retreat had turned into a stage for conflict. She began marching up my dock, clipboard in hand, reading aloud every single infraction she could find or maybe invent. She pointed at my deck, the one I had built with my own hands last summer, and said it didn't meet HOA regulations. She gestured at my dock and claimed it was too long, too close to the water, too whatever she could think of. I wanted to laugh. Seriously, my dock was fine, perfectly legal, but she didn't seem interested in facts. She was in full performance mode. Every word she spoke sounded rehearsed, like she had been practicing in front of a mirror for weeks. I leaned against the railing, trying to keep my expression neutral. Inside, I was a mixture of disbelief and amusement. Who gets this worked up over a deck, a dock, a patch of grass? Apparently she did. Her voice grew louder as she waved the clipboard, as if the movement could physically enforce her demands. She rattled off fines, deadlines, and threats, all delivered with the same intensity you'd expect from a courtroom judge sentencing a criminal. I realized she wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to dominate, to assert control over a piece of property that belonged to me. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, drawn by the commotion. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see how I would respond. Some gave me a thumbs up, others whispered to each other, and a few quietly filmed with their phones. I could sense the tension rising like static electricity before a storm. I tried to reason with her, pointing out gently that she was standing on my lawn while lecturing me about mine. She didn't care. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she turned her sharp gaze on me, her finger stabbing the air like a weapon. Then she said the words I had been dreading. "We'll be back." She spun on her heel and stormed off toward the SUV, the papers in her hand flapping in the wind like a flag of war. I watched her go, a strange mix of relief and anticipation washing over me. I knew she wasn't bluffing. They would return, and next time it wouldn't be subtle. The quiet serenity of the lake was gone, replaced by the sense of impending confrontation. I sat down again, trying to calm my nerves, but my mind was racing. I thought about what I could do to prepare, how I could protect my property and still stay within the law. I stared at the water, the gentle waves mocking the storm that was coming, and I realized that my peaceful weekend was over. The battle had begun, and I had no choice but to fight, or at least survive the chaos that was about to descend. The morning sun reflected off the lake, and for a brief moment everything seemed calm again. But I knew it was a calm before the storm. She was coming back, and I had to be ready. I didn't have to wait long. Just a few hours after her ominous departure, I saw the SUV turning back into my driveway. My heart sank and then raced at the same time. She was back, and this time she wasn't alone. Trailing behind her were a few of her so-called committee members, clipboards in hand, faces set in the same grim determination she always carried. Neighbors started gathering again, their curiosity now tinged with anticipation. Whispers floated across fences like a low drumbeat. What's she going to do this time? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing: she was not leaving without a scene. She marched up to my dock, shoulders squared, head held high, clipboard clutched like it was a weapon. Before I could even say hello, she launched into a litany of rules and violations, reading from her papers with the kind of zeal that made me wonder if she had memorized every sentence in the HOA handbook. She gestured wildly at my deck, my dock, even the small flower beds along the path, insisting that each one was a blatant offense. The committee members nodded seriously, as if her every word was gospel. It was surreal, like watching a performance that had gone off the rails. I tried to respond calmly, pointing out that I had checked all permits, that the dock was within legal limits, that the flowers were harmless. She ignored me. She didn't even glance at my explanations. Instead, she waved her finger closer, each movement sharp and deliberate, and repeated her demands louder, as if volume could make her right. I realized then that reason would not work here. She wasn't interested in conversation. She wanted spectacle. The crowd of neighbors grew larger, drawn to the commotion. Some whispered among themselves, others pointed and chuckled quietly. A few discreetly filmed, knowing that a meltdown was likely and that this moment might be worth sharing. I felt a mix of irritation and amusement. It was absurd, almost cartoonish, watching an adult lose her composure over docks and decks. But at the same time, the tension was real. I could feel it pressing down, a tightness in my chest that made every second stretch longer than it should. She suddenly stepped closer, almost invading my personal space, and in a voice that quivered slightly despite her attempt at authority, she said, "You will comply. You will remove the dock, repaint the deck, fix the landscaping, and pay the fines by the end of the week. Otherwise, there will be consequences." I blinked. She sounded like she was reading from a script, and yet the fury in her eyes told me she meant it. My fingers itched to lock the gate and walk inside, but I held myself in check. I had to stay calm. Then she shifted tactics. She turned to the crowd, raising her voice, hoping to shame me publicly. "This property is an eyesore. It's a violation of community standards. Don't let anyone think this is acceptable." She stomped her foot for emphasis, and the committee members nodded along as if this were a trial instead of a small lakeside home. I realized she was trying to humiliate me, to make me feel small in front of everyone watching. But instead, the more she shouted, the more absurd she looked. My inner amusement bubbled up, and I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. I finally spoke, keeping my tone calm, deliberate, almost like I was narrating to an audience. "I appreciate your concern, but everything on this property complies with the law. My dock, my deck, and my landscaping are all within regulations. If you have evidence to the contrary, I'd be happy to review it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. She had expected me to flinch, to apologize, maybe even beg. Instead, I stood there, calm, steady, unflinching. The tension in the air thickened. Neighbors leaned forward, sensing the drama escalating, waiting for the next move. She huffed, red-faced, and threw her arms wide in exasperation. "We will be back. This is not over." She stormed back to her SUV, muttering under her breath, and the committee members trailed behind her, some shaking their heads, others scribbling notes furiously. I watched them leave, feeling a strange combination of relief and adrenaline. The first confrontation had ended, but I knew it was only a prelude. The real battle was coming, and I had to be ready. As the dust settled, the lake returned to its quiet rhythm. The water shimmered under the afternoon sun, and the birds chirped innocently, unaware of the chaos that had just unfolded. I sat on the dock, sipping my coffee again, thinking about what was next. She was determined, stubborn, and unpredictable. The suspense of her next arrival lingered in the air like a storm cloud on the horizon. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, but I also realized that part of this battle would be mental. A test of patience, nerves, and maybe, just maybe, a little humor. The calm had returned for now, but only for now. The storm was brewing, and I could feel it coming. After the first confrontation, I knew I couldn't just sit back and hope she would go away. Her words, her gestures, and that unwavering glare had left a mark on me. I realized this wasn't just a dispute over docks or decks. It was a battle of wills, and I had to prepare. I started thinking about everything I could do to protect my property without breaking the law. I had to be ready because she was coming back, and I could feel it in my bones. I walked along the perimeter of the lodge, inspecting every gate, every fence, every possible point of entry. The gates needed to be secure, and I made sure the locks were strong and new. I even added an extra chain just to be safe, and it clicked satisfyingly in place. The sound of it made me feel a little better, like a signal that at least one thing in this confrontation was under my control. Next, I turned to the cameras. I had a few installed for security, but I repositioned them to cover every angle of the driveway and front lawn. If she tried anything while I wasn't looking, I would know. Neighbors might watch for drama, but I would have evidence too. I set up my phone to record automatically, imagining the moment she tried to argue with me again. The thought made me smirk. This was turning into a chess game, and I was at least one move ahead. Then came the signs. Nothing too aggressive, just a few well-placed warnings about private property and no trespassing. I imagined her face if she saw them on her return, the color rising in her cheeks, the dramatic pause before she started shouting. It was a small victory, but one that made me feel more prepared. Every detail mattered, and the suspense of her next move was almost delicious. I even considered my appearance. It might sound silly, but I didn't want to look nervous or scared in front of the crowd I knew would gather. I put on my sunglasses, grabbed a hat, and leaned casually against the railing with a cup of coffee. The lodge looked calm, the water reflected the afternoon sun, and for a moment I imagined this scene from a movie, the hero quietly preparing while the villain plots their next move. The humor of it kept me grounded. This was ridiculous, yes, but it was also a story worth living. As I went about my preparations, I couldn't help but replay the first confrontation in my head. Her gestures, her shrill voice, the way she had tried to assert authority over my property, I realized that part of winning this was staying calm. If she expected me to panic, to apologize, or to open the gate in fear, she would be sorely disappointed. The tension of waiting, the uncertainty of when she would return, kept me on edge, but I embraced it. Suspense is its own kind of power, and I had it in spades. Neighbors walked by occasionally, offering smiles or quiet commentary. Some whispered about how the HOA president had overreacted, others joked about the drama unfolding at the lake. I waved and smiled, keeping up the calm facade. It was important that I looked in control, that the lodge seemed untouchable, that the suspense of the next encounter built naturally. Every look from a neighbor, every comment from a passerby, added to the story that was already taking shape. As the sun dipped lower, I did a final sweep of the property. Everything was in place, the gates locked, the cameras recording, the signs posted, and my nerves steadied. I sat down on the dock again, looking out over the lake, and let the silence settle. But it wasn't true silence. I could feel the storm approaching, a subtle tension in the air, a feeling that the next confrontation would be more intense than the last. I took a deep breath and imagined the moment she would arrive. Her dramatic flair, her shouting, the committee members flailing helplessly beside her. It was almost entertaining. Yet beneath the humor, I knew the stakes were real. I had to be ready, calm, and strategic. Every second mattered. Every detail of preparation could turn the tide in my favor. The first confrontation had been a warning. Now I was preparing for war. The suspense of what was coming next made the hair on my arms stand on end, and I welcomed it. The lake remained calm, but I knew it was only the calm before the storm. I barely had time to enjoy the calm before the storm when I saw them coming. The black SUV pulled into the driveway again, but this time it wasn't just her. She had brought reinforcements. A handful of HOA members spilled out, clipboards in hand, faces set in the same grim determination she wore like armor. They moved with purpose, each step deliberate, like they were entering enemy territory. My stomach tightened. The suspense was instant, electric, and impossible to ignore. As they approached, I noticed the neighbors had started gathering again, some peeking from behind hedges, others quietly filming with their phones. Whispers traveled through the crowd. "They're really serious this time, and I can't believe she's doing this again." I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. I had prepared, yes, but seeing them all together, marching like an army onto my property, made my pulse quicken. This was no longer a simple confrontation. It was a full-blown invasion. She led the charge, clipboard waving in the air like a banner, voice sharp and commanding. "Open the gate now," she demanded. Her tone was one of authority, but I could see a flicker of frustration in her eyes. She had expected me to panic, to back down, and yet here I was, leaning casually against the railing, cup of coffee in hand, calm as a lake at dawn. The irony wasn't lost on me, and the tension of the moment made it almost cinematic. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I let her words hang in the air, feeling the suspense build. The neighbors watched intently, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Some whispered excitedly, others exchanged glances, all curious to see how I would handle the situation. It felt like the entire community was holding its breath, waiting for the first move in what had quickly become a high-stakes standoff. She took a step closer, voice rising. "I will not ask again. You will open the gate and you will comply with the HOA rules immediately." Her committee members nodded vigorously, reinforcing her demands as if sheer numbers could enforce them. She was expecting a reaction, some sign of fear, maybe even submission. Instead, I sipped my coffee slowly, deliberately, maintaining a calm demeanor that seemed to frustrate her even more. The suspense in the air was palpable. Every step she took toward me, every shake of her finger, every shout was met with measured composure on my part. I could feel the tension rising like the pressure before a storm breaks. The crowd leaned in, some covering their mouths to stifle laughter, others whispering speculations. The sense of anticipation was almost unbearable, like waiting for the first drop of rain in a long, hot drought. She tried a new tactic, public shamming. Pointing at my deck, my dock, even my carefully arranged flower beds, she declared, "This property is unacceptable. It violates every standard. Who would allow such disrespect in our community?" The words were loud, dramatic, and over the top. I imagined a movie camera capturing the moment, framing her as the villain in this absurd saga. And yet her fury only made the scene more tense, more captivating for everyone watching. I finally spoke, my tone calm but deliberate. "Thank you for your concern. Everything on this property is in full compliance with the law and local regulations. If you have evidence otherwise, I'd be happy to review it." Her eyes widened. The audacity of my calm seemed to shock her, and the suspense in her expression made it clear she didn't know how to respond. The neighbors exchanged knowing glances, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. She stomped her foot, red-faced, trying to regain control. "We will not leave until you comply," she shouted. The committee members echoed her, looking increasingly tense themselves. The standoff continued. A battle of wills played out on my front lawn, with the lake shimmering silently behind me as if it were holding its breath along with everyone else. Minutes stretched like hours. I didn't move. I didn't panic. The suspense hung heavy in the air, almost tangible. Finally, she threw up her hands in frustration, muttered something under her breath, and stormed back toward her SUV, followed reluctantly by her team. The tension didn't dissipate completely. It lingered, charged and alive, because I knew this wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before they returned, and next time it would be even more dramatic. As they drove away, the neighbors applauded quietly, some laughing under their breath. I leaned back against the railing, coffee in hand, watching the sun glint off the lake. The calm had returned, but only for now. The suspense, the tension, and the inevitable return of the HOA were all still out there, waiting to crash down like the next wave against my dock. The battle was far from over, but for now I had held my ground. And that suspense, the waiting, the uncertainty, was almost as thrilling as the confrontation itself. The air was thick with tension the moment she returned the following morning. I had barely finished my coffee when I saw her approaching again, and this time she seemed even more determined. Neighbors were already gathering, drawn to the promise of drama, whispering excitedly and filming discreetly. I could feel their anticipation like a pulse in the air, and I knew that what was about to happen would be unforgettable. She marched up to the dock, clipboard in hand, and immediately began a tirade, her voice echoing across the water. She read from her notes as if reciting a decree, detailing every violation, every minor infraction, and every imagined oversight. Her gestures were exaggerated, flailing wildly at the deck, the dock, the flower beds, even the perfectly trimmed grass. It was absurd and theatrical, but the suspense it created was real. I could see the neighbors leaning forward, caught between amusement and disbelief. I kept my calm, leaning casually against the railing, sipping coffee slowly. Every time she pointed a finger at me, I matched it with a steady gaze, refusing to look intimidated. Inside, my mind raced with strategy, thinking about how each move she made could be turned to my advantage. I noticed how her voice cracked slightly when she raised it, the tell of someone who had lost control without realizing it. The suspense of watching her unravel in front of everyone was almost too good to be true. As she continued, she tried to shame me publicly, shouting that my property was an eyesore, a disgrace, and a violation of every standard the HOA upheld. She paced in front of the neighbors, expecting them to nod in agreement, expecting me to apologize or look frightened. Instead, the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered among themselves, clearly entertained by her over-the-top performance, while others watched silently, waiting to see how I would respond. The suspense in the air was palpable, like a storm on the horizon, ready to break at any second. I finally spoke, calm and measured, my words cutting through the noise like a blade. "Thank you for your concern. Everything on this property is legal, permitted, and within regulations. If you have evidence to the contrary, I would be happy to review it." Her eyes widened in disbelief. She had expected confrontation, fear, perhaps even a flustered apology. Instead, I offered clarity and calm, and the crowd could see it. The suspense was almost unbearable, everyone wondering what she would do next. Her face turned red with fury. She stomped her foot and waved her arms dramatically, trying to regain control. Her committee members whispered to one another, looking increasingly uncomfortable. She pointed at my dock again, then at my deck, shouting that I would face fines and consequences, yet every word only seemed to expose her own loss of control. I felt a thrill, knowing that the suspense of this moment, the uncertainty, the tension, was completely in my favor. The neighbors started whispering and giggling quietly, their amusement growing as she spiraled. One of them even muttered, "I've never seen anyone get this worked up over a dock." The combination of her overreaction and my calm demeanor kept everyone on edge. Suspense hung thick because nobody knew how far she would go, how loud she would get, or what absurd action she might take next. She tried one last tactic. She started packing, pointing to invisible rules, waving papers in the air, and demanding that I comply immediately. She screamed about fines and board approvals, her voice cracking under the pressure. The neighbors leaned in closer, sensing that this was the breaking point. The suspense was almost unbearable. Would I finally give in, or would I stand my ground again? I remained steady, taking deliberate sips of coffee, watching her meltdown unfold. The calm contrast of my composure against her escalating chaos made every second more dramatic. She flailed, shouting, packing, and gesturing wildly, and yet nothing fazed me. The suspense was electric, the anticipation of her next move keeping everyone on edge. Finally, exhausted and flustered, she stopped, huffing and muttering under her breath. She glanced at the neighbors, clearly embarrassed that so many had witnessed her public meltdown. She stormed off toward her SUV, her committee members trailing behind her, still whispering and scribbling notes. The suspense didn't dissipate. It lingered, thick and tense, because everyone knew this confrontation wasn't over. The battle was far from finished, and the next chapter promised to be even more intense. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline fade slightly. The lake shimmered calmly, birds chirped as if nothing had happened, and the quiet seemed almost deceptive. The suspense was alive, waiting for the next confrontation, and I knew that when it came, I would be ready. This was far from the end. After her public meltdown, I knew I couldn't just wait for the next chaos to hit. She had tried intimidation, shouting, and theatrics, but now it was time to fight with something stronger: logic. I spent the morning reviewing the property rules, local laws, and permits. Every detail had to be perfect, every argument airtight. The suspense of knowing she would return, ready to escalate, kept my adrenaline humming. I positioned myself on the dock again, coffee in hand, calm and collected. The lake shimmered behind me, a deceptive mirror of serenity. Every time a car approached the driveway, my pulse quickened. I was anticipating the confrontation, imagining her dramatic entrance and the cluster of committee members following her, clipboards at the ready. The suspense was like a living thing, circling, waiting for its moment. Sure enough, mid-afternoon, the SUV rolled back in. She jumped out, red-faced and determined, waving her arms as if she could physically enforce her demands. This time she came armed with more rules, more papers, and a renewed sense of urgency. Her committee members whispered nervously to each other, exchanging glances that betrayed their doubt. The suspense built instantly. I could feel it tightening the air around us like invisible cords. She launched into another tirade, this one longer, louder, and more frantic. She pointed at my deck, my dock, and even the flower beds, insisting that I had violated every standard imaginable. The neighbors gathered, leaning closer, whispering, and some filming. The suspense was almost unbearable as everyone waited to see if she could finally make me yield. But I didn't budge. Instead, I calmly met her gaze, letting my quiet composure speak louder than her shouting. Then I spoke, deliberately and measured. I appreciate your concern, but everything on this property is legal and fully permitted. If you have evidence that contradicts this, I am happy to review it. The words cut through the chaos, leaving a stunned silence behind. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to find a response, but she couldn't. Her committee members looked at each other nervously, sensing the shift. The suspense in the air was palpable, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for her next move. Her frustration was palpable. She stumbled over her words, misquoting regulations, flailing with the papers in her hand. Every mistake she made only made her look more desperate, and the suspense of her unraveling in front of the crowd was almost intoxicating. Neighbors exchanged glances, some whispering quietly, others stifling laughter. She had intended to intimidate, but the logic and calm she faced turned the tables. The tension thickened, everyone wondering how she would recover. She tried to regain control, raising her voice, packing back and forth, gesturing wildly, but the cracks in her confidence were obvious. Her committee members whispered and scribbled frantically, unsure how to salvage the situation. Every desperate gesture only heightened the suspense. I could feel the moment stretching, taut as a drawn bowstring, each second a test of nerves, strategy, and patience. I continued calmly, pointing out specifics from the property codes, citing permit dates, and highlighting every fact that contradicted her accusations. My voice was steady, clear, deliberate. The crowd leaned in, drawn by the drama, sensing that the turning point had arrived. The suspense was almost unbearable. No one knew how she would react to being cornered by facts and reason. She flailed harder, raising her arms, shouting rules nobody remembered correctly, and inadvertently insulting some of her own committee members. The neighbors whispered, stifled laughter spread through the crowd, and I felt a thrill watching her desperation unfold. The suspense was no longer just about the confrontation. It was about watching someone unravel under the weight of their own overconfidence. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, she stomped her foot, muttered under her breath, and stormed back toward the SUV. Her committee members followed, some shaking their heads, some scribbling frantically. The suspense lingered even after they left. The neighbors whispered and laughed quietly, commenting on her meltdown and my calm demeanor. It was clear that this battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. Logic had won this round, and the suspense of what she would do next hung in the air like a storm cloud over the lake. I leaned back on the railing, sipping my coffee, feeling a mixture of relief and adrenaline. The lake shimmered peacefully, hiding the tension that still lingered. The battle was ongoing, and the next encounter would be critical. Suspense, anticipation, and a hint of amusement filled my mind. She would be back, and I had to be ready. The tension had been building all week, and I could feel it in the air like static electricity before a storm. I knew she would return, and this time it felt different. She had tried shouting, intimidation, and theatrics, but logic had exposed her cracks. I leaned against the railing, coffee in hand, watching the driveway, my nerves buzzing with anticipation. The suspense was almost unbearable. Neighbors began gathering quietly, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. And then I saw the SUV appear again, rolling slowly up the driveway, the windows glinting in the afternoon sun. She jumped out with a force that made it clear she had brought her full determination this time. Her clipboard flapped like a flag in the wind, papers spilling slightly from the edges. Behind her, a few committee members followed, faces tight with anxiety, clearly aware that they were walking into another public spectacle. She marched toward me, red-faced and furious, every step punctuated by her loud declarations. "Open the gate! You will comply immediately!" she shouted, voice cracking with frustration. Her fingers jabbed toward my dock and deck as if they were symbols of my defiance. The neighbors watched intently, holding their breath, some quietly filming, all captivated by the suspense. I remained calm, sipping my coffee slowly, letting her words hang in the air. Her shouting seemed to intensify the suspense, each exaggerated gesture making her look more desperate. She stomped her foot, waved her arms, and flipped through her clipboard like a conductor leading a chaotic orchestra. It was almost hypnotic, the way she tried to assert authority in front of everyone. But the suspense was mine to control. Then came the moment I had been preparing for. I walked slowly toward the gate, letting the crowd see me moving deliberately as if every step had weight and meaning. With a firm turn of the key, the gate clicked locked. The sound resonated across the driveway, loud and final. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing, searching for words that wouldn't come. The suspense was electric. The crowd gasped quietly, realizing that she had lost her grip on the situation entirely. She began to scream, pointing wildly at the locked gate, shouting about rules and authority, but nothing seemed to work. I stepped back, watching the spectacle unfold, the calm eye in the center of her storm. The neighbors whispered and laughed quietly, their anticipation finally paying off as they watched her unravel. The suspense was tangible. Every movement, every flail of her arms heightened the drama, like watching a slow-motion disaster. Desperate, she tried one last tactic, pulling out papers, waving them in the air, and demanding compliance from both me and the neighbors. The committee members exchanged panicked glances, scribbling notes furiously, clearly unsure how to salvage the situation. The suspense was at its peak. Nobody knew what she would do next, how far she would go, or if she would finally admit defeat. I walked closer to the gate, my movements calm and deliberate, and spoke evenly. "This property is legally compliant. The dock, the deck, and all landscaping meet regulations. You may refer to these documents if you wish." I held up my papers, letting the neighbors see the evidence clearly. Her hands shook slightly, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. The suspense in her expression mirrored the anticipation of the crowd. Finally, exhausted and completely flustered, she threw up her arms and stormed off toward her SUV, muttering under her breath. The committee members followed hesitantly, some still scribbling, some glancing nervously at the neighbors, all aware that the spectacle had been lost. The suspense lingered in the air even as they drove away, thick and palpable, because everyone knew this wasn't over forever. The stakes had been set, and she had been humiliated publicly. I leaned back on the dock, watching the water shimmer under the afternoon sun. The crowd slowly dispersed, whispering among themselves, some congratulating me quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The suspense had reached its peak and released like a wave. I had stood my ground, maintained composure, and turned the drama into a public display of calm triumph. As the lake returned to serenity, I sipped the last of my coffee and let out a slow breath. The battle had reached its climax, and for now, victory was mine. The suspense of the previous days had built to this moment, and the lake reflected not only the sunlight, but the satisfaction of standing firm against absurdity. I knew she might try again, but for today the storm had passed, and the calm felt earned. After the storm had passed, the lake finally returned to its calm, reflective surface. The sun shimmered on the water, birds chirped lazily, and for the first time in days, I could breathe without the tension knotting my stomach. Neighbors trickled back to their yards, exchanging knowing glances, quietly sharing the story of the showdown they had witnessed. The suspense of the past week lingered, but now it was replaced by a mixture of relief, amusement, and disbelief. I walked along the dock, stretching my legs and letting the breeze wash over me. It was surreal to think about how a conflict over a dock, a deck, and a few flower beds had turned into a spectacle that drew an audience from across the neighborhood. Part of me still couldn't believe her audacity, the sheer drama she had brought, and yet I had to admit it had been entertaining in a way that no mundane weekend could ever be. Humor crept into my thoughts as I replayed her flailing arms, the cracking of her voice, and the shocked expressions of the committee members. Neighbors approached quietly, some shyly congratulating me, others laughing softly at the absurdity of it all. One whispered, "I've never seen anyone so unhinged over a lawn." Another chuckled, "You should have charged admission. It was better than reality TV." I smiled, appreciating their support and the sense of community that had grown out of what had been a tense confrontation. The suspense of her repeated visits had brought us together, and I felt a strange satisfaction knowing that the calm, methodical approach had not only preserved my property, but also won the respect of those watching. As I walked back to the lodge, I reflected on the absurdity and intensity of the week. The confrontation had tested my patience, my nerves, and my ability to remain composed under pressure. It was exhausting, yes, but also empowering. I realized that calmness, preparation, and a clear understanding of one's rights were more powerful than any shouting, intimidation, or theatrics. The suspense of not knowing how she would act next had kept me alert, but the ultimate victory had been mine, because I had maintained control over my emotions and my property. I checked the locks on the gates one more time, the chains secure and the signs still in place. The thought of her returning crossed my mind, and I smiled. Let her try. The suspense of a potential future encounter was no longer frightening. It was a game, one I knew I could win again if needed. I imagined her flailing, shouting, and gesturing wildly once more, and the humor of the scenario made me chuckle. Sometimes absurdity comes with its own rewards. The neighbors lingered, some offering coffee, others chatting casually about the week's events. We shared stories, laughed quietly at her dramatic attempts to assert control, and reflected on the spectacle that had unfolded in front of everyone. It was a reminder that even the most tense situations could have moments of humor and human connection if handled with patience and calm. The suspense had drawn us all in, but the resolution brought a sense of relief and, strangely, camaraderie. As the day drew to a close, I walked to the edge of the dock and gazed at the lake. The water mirrored the sky, calm and endless, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of the past days. I thought about the lessons learned, the power of preparation, the value of remaining composed under pressure, and the importance of standing firm in the face of absurdity. The suspense had been intense, the drama unforgettable, but the outcome had been satisfying beyond measure. Finally, I sat back in my chair, coffee in hand, and let the peace settle over me. The lake, the lodge, and even the neighbors had witnessed a story they wouldn't soon forget. The HOA president might try again someday, but for now the calm had returned, the suspense resolved, and the victory was mine. Laughter and relief filled the quiet moments, a perfect ending to a week of chaos, and I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction at having navigated it all with grace, humor, and calm authority. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dock. The water reflected the fading light, serene and beautiful, as if nothing had happened at all. But I knew better. The battle had been fought, the lesson learned, and the suspense of the week had finally given way to a satisfying, triumphant calm. The Lakeside Lodge was mine. The drama had been endured, and I could finally relax, knowing that I had faced the storm and emerged victorious.